All right, this is Utah Family Law. Today we're here with Clarissa Mace. Clarissa, do you want to go ahead and tell us about yourself and introduce yourself?
Yes, so I am a marriage and family therapist here in Utah, and I own a private practice in Orem. So it's called Utah Marriage and Family Therapy Clinic. I modeled that off of one of my past clinics in Arizona. And so they just do family and marriage therapy. And that's kind of what my dream has been to do is just focus on marriages and couples or families and then kind of build it out with like other therapists as well. And so that's where I'm at right now. And my clinic, you can kind of find it through utah.therapyclinic.com. That is how you can find me, and that has all my contact information and my book now button if people are interested in scheduling.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get started with some of the questions I have for you. I was reading through your website and I was looking at different things you offered and talked about on your website. And one of the things you talked about is having a safe space. So I wanted to ask you, how do you create a safe space in your therapy sessions?
Yeah, I generally do that by trying to mirror my client, and the a little bit of what that is just like a therapy technique that you learn in school is just to be able to model kind of the way they talk or their mannerisms. And it's not necessarily me adapting to them. It's just if they are more like quiet or timid, then I would kind of be more quiet and timid as well. But if they're like boisterous and loud, then I'll mirror kind of those things. And similar with humor, like a lot of people use humor or things like that. So I'll mirror like similar ways that they have humor. And it also takes a lot of like building rapport. And so I just make sure people feel comfortable. I get to know them. I like being personable. So as long as they feel like it's not super stiff or uncomfortable in the office. So that also takes like the interior design of it too, is just like pillows and blankets, lots of comfortable things. So, and then as we go, I generally check in a lot of like, how are you feeling after today? At least after the first session, because therapy fit with like therapist is super important to therapy. So if you don't fit with your therapist, then it just isn't really going to work. So I guess in summary, like building rapport with them, making sure that you get to know them, that you're personable, kind of mirroring who they are and how they like to talk through things, and not trying to like force any of my own agenda, but just like really making the space about them so that feels really familiar to them. So that's how I create a safe space.
Do you find that hard, like keeping an open mind and not forcing your own agenda on people? Or is that like a pretty easy thing that you've just been able to develop over time?
I think it was something that feel like is an innate skill I've had. Like just growing up, I've always just been very like interested in people and humans and like family dynamics and stuff. So I think it's something I innately had. And then through like schooling and experience with clients, you just kind of get used to really being like not having any set like way that life should go. So there's not really any binaries of like good and bad. You just kind of take the information in and then see what it like what puzzle and what it puts together. So I don't know, it's a skill you develop, but I think it's really helpful when a therapist also innately has like a really open mind or is really good at listening and not like talking about themselves as much as well.
Kind of getting more into couples therapy. What do you say to couples who are scared to go to couples therapy because they're scared of what other people might think about them going to therapy, like that stigma? Like, what do you say to those people?
It's definitely valid. So I would probably really validate that feeling. Like it's hard to go to therapy, couples or individual, and then to tell people. I do think the stigma is slowly changing. And so I'd maybe say I like when people can just set their own boundary on that so they don't even have to tell anyone. Like you can keep it all private. You don't even need to tell people that you are going if that's more comfortable. But if people are kind of interested in telling people, then I would say like just keeping an open mind of what people might think, because I've had a lot of people be more surprised at how family or friends respond and more supportive about it versus like judgmental or anything, because people generally want you to be happy. And so if you're going out and looking for help on your own and you're finding help, then I think that people support that for the most part.
Usually your friends want you to be happy, right? They want you to be
Hmm.
successful. And so, as I was reading on your website, I also saw that you talked about how you help people and couples through poor communication, disconnection, infertility, faith transition, anxiety, self image, family concerns, prenatal therapy, and more. Is there something between all of those things? Is there one thing that kind of ties them together that people should work on, or are they all different? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I think there's a lot of similarities between the all of them. So as far as like all the couples issues is with like communication or disconnection, there could be a lot of similarities found in that. And then as well as like anxiety, self-image, faith transition, that could all have a lot of similarities, but I don't know if there's necessarily one specific thing. I do feel like all of them are like a giant puzzle where if anyone came in with these presenting concerns, I'd probably just get to know like what are all the pieces. And that's essentially called like systems theory, which is what I like in my schooling, that's what they teach a lot about is more systemic. And so it's basically understanding what are all the pieces that play into that presenting concern because it's not necessarily like anxiety isn't, oh, you have something wrong with your brain. That's not always just the only thing. Like it's so many pieces that are at play. So like maybe perfectionism or other things. And similar with like disconnection, I don't necessarily feel like people a lot of like concerns is, oh, we just feel like roommates or we don't know what to talk about anymore. And I don't necessarily think it's like because they stop talking. It's just so many factors all together that make up the big puzzle of we feel disconnected. So maybe for that one, it'd be like they have a lot of walls up because of a lot of hurt. And through the hurt, they like don't feel as comfortable being vulnerable. So then they don't talk as much. So then they feel like roommates. So it's just like each one of them probably has so many string of events and pieces that you could put together to see the whole puzzle. And that's probably the only similarity that I would say is across all of the concerns that come in and how I would treat each of them would be with that lens of systems theory. But beyond that, I think that the core pain for each of them could be different per person. And so that's just something I would have to figure out and find out with the client.
On like a typical bias basis, do you ever find that there is one thing that links to the rest of them? Like in your systems, is there one thing that usually precedes the rest? Like does poor communication precede disconnection and self-image or family concerns? Is there one that you've seen? Like it's not going to 100% be all the time, but is there one that's majorly the issue?
If I could pinpoint it, yeah, the majority, because I agree, probably not 100% all the time. I would say like I could think of two things, and they're probably really similar, and maybe it just comes down to like attachment theory with like basically your attachment theory is how you grew up shapes the way that you attach in your relationships. So with your primary caregiver, you kind of create this attachment theory or attachment style. And that's like either secure, avoidant, or anxious are the main ones. And then there's a bunch of like branches off from that. But then you get in a relationship as an adult, and that attachment theory impacts the way you are. So if you're avoidant, then you're not going to be as vulnerable or conflict will be really difficult to get through with an avoidant partner because they will want to maybe more shut off earlier than an anxious partner because an anxious partner is going to want to get to the bottom of it. So I'd say like attachment style is probably one of the biggest core pieces. And then the thing that I thought of beyond that was like people's identities. I think that like having a self identity if you're lost with that, then it can create like a lot of anxiety or self image concerns or relationship concerns because you don't necessarily know who you are. So you don't always feel like secure in your relationship or don't know how to kind of present and hold boundaries and do all those things. So those would probably be the two things like attachment style as well as like identity, like who you are and do you know who you are and things like that.
Very interesting. Thank you. Spending your
Yeah.
Personal opinion on that. All right. What advice do you have for young couples who are learning to communicate? They're like just getting into relationship, they're just meeting, they're just going on dates. How can they start off with a good foundation of communication?
I'd say the number one thing, and maybe this is also like a core piece that is threaded through all the presenting concerns I work with, but I would say like empathy and validation uh, before anything else. Like always in any conflict or any situation, validate and have empathy for your partner. And essentially what I tell people with that is that you don't have to agree to empathize or validate. So a lot of people they begin to have poor communication because they think that their partner needs to essentially be who they are or communicate how they are, or when they have a conflict come up, see it the exact same way as the other person sees it. And that's not reality. Like we all have our own brains and lenses. And so if you just try and sit there and like get the other person to agree with you in a conversation, it's just not going to go anywhere. And especially if like somebody brings up something vulnerable and then you don't validate it, then that's also not going to go very well. So I think empathy and validation is probably the number one communication and even connection thing that could be beneficial. And then just remembering that you do not have to agree to empathize and validate with your partner. You can have a different point of view, and it's just connecting with something within you that can understand where they're coming from and holding space for their emotions while like still having your own emotions about things. You don't have to like line up and have the exact same experience to be able to provide that empathy. So that's probably the number one thing I'd say.
There. Reminds me of the phrase people often use of like when they're having disagreement and one person's not agreeing with the other person, the person goes, "Oh, I'm sorry that what I said impacted you that way," or "I'm sorry that what I said hurt you." Do you know better ways to say phrases like that when you do have someone that you're in a relationship with and you realize that maybe you have hurt their feelings, but you think it's like not, they should hurt, their feelings should not have been hurt, but they did anyways? What type of advice do you give to people when they have those conversations?
Yeah, I would say so with what you're saying, the one that kills me is just I'm sorry you feel hurt. Because it kind of is saying like you feel hurt and that's why we're in this situation. It's not that you did anything. So that would be my advice is like taking ownership, which takes like self-reflection. I even just recently had a session where we got all into the nitty-gritty nuances of validation versus ownership. And I think that the ownership is more of like not necessarily hearing your partner say something and then owning exactly what they're saying, but it's more of like a self-reflective, like, what is my role in this? What did I do? And then when you identify what your role was in what happened, then that's what you should like apologize for. So if I contributed to like escalation with my husband, then in some way if it was like because I was grumpy or I like yelled at him about something like then I would take ownership for my things and not necessarily like I'm sorry you feel this way about what I did, but it does take a lot of self-reflection. Like you have to have a moment where you can honestly sit with yourself and be like, what did I do to contribute to this? But a lot of people, they just want to go like, you did this, you did that, and that's not beneficial.
Or getting defensive that you hurt someone else's feelings. So it was never your intention, right? So I think
Yeah.
people tend to get defensive before they're apologetic.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you told me about young couples of how they can begin to communicate, but what about couples who have been together for a while and they're starting to feel that disconnect? Or what advice do you have for couples that have been together a while so that they can increase their communication or make it better?
With couples that have been together for a while, you'll find that they have a lot of resentments and stuff built up. So that would be something that needs to be addressed before you could really see progress with communication because you could tell them to, validate, empathize, take ownership, do all those things, but at the end of the day, they already have so many walls of resentment up. And so you do have to address like the past hurt and the things that have happened through their relationship and approach the communication through those past things before you could really move forward. And so if somebody had something that happened way back, like we would go back and talk about that and then give the opportunity for each partner to like validate the hurt of each other and take ownership of like what happened then. And that's probably the main thing that needs to happen, because if those walls are there, like they don't just come down. Like somebody's hurt about something and they've been hurt for years and this resentment is really built up, like it's not just going to go away by just validate. So that's probably the thing that needs to happen first.
And so if they are going in that situation, like if there's a couple that's in therapy and they're talking about hurt from the past, is there any good reason for someone to keep holding on to something that hurt in the past, or should they just get it all out?
I always respect what people want to do, because some people they do express like, I don't want to go there, I don't want to talk about the past. Um, and I could see where there's some things that we don't necessarily have to go back. I would just think like if their current like experiences with each other aren't triggering those past things, then maybe we don't need to go back and like address it. But if it is like the same patterns that are happening in the present that happened then we do need to go back and like repair that and address it. But yeah, again, if it's like a different thing that happened or something that isn't regularly hurting them, then we could just leave it in the past and like move forward. So it's just really up to the person, like what they would decide. And then if there are circumstances that were really intense in the past, then it just, yeah, it's so sensitive that I just want to make sure that they choose that. And whatever reason they have, I would probably go with. So there's plenty of good reasons to not talk about it as long as they have a realistic expectation of the progress that they'll see moving forward. And if they're accepting of, hey, we might not see as much progress in this one area because of not going back and addressing this, that's perfectly fine. But I want them to like informed consent that they might not see the progress if they don't want to touch the thing, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. So just so you're letting them know like there could be more progress, they could become closer and less disconnected if they're willing to go there. But if they're not willing to go there, they're going to lose out and improving their
Yeah.
relationship as much as they could have if they did.
Yeah. And I respect whatever their decision is, because it is really hard if things have happened in the past. It's really hard to go back and dig it all up. And if they don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine. It's just, yeah, making sure that they're comfortable with whatever level of connection they're trying to get to, just being realistic of what that might look like given how we talk through things. So
Another question I have for you is what would you say to couples who have decided that they would just be hurt by their partner's words and that's just the way it is, and they just accept the fact that they're going to get hurt throughout the rest of their marriage?
that type of narrative will definitely make them very stuck. It's like the thing that came to my mind is like you will feel stuck if that's like the narrative that you hold on to. And so I'd say to try and keep an open mind as far as like being able to open up and not see it as that, give their partner like the opportunity to show that they aren't just going to hurt them, which again might take like a professional to coach the partner to respond in better ways or respond to needs and stuff. But I would say I like to remove the stigma of divorce. There's a lot of stigma about divorce. And so if people are in that mind space and they just really don't see anything changing, then it's just being comfortable of like, is divorce the option? Let's talk through it. Because when you remove the stigma of that and just kind of talk openly about it, then they can make a more informed decision and say, yeah, no, we don't want that, or yes, we do want that. So it just really depends on like what level that they are stuck in that pattern of we're just going to be hurt by each other, and how much like can that budge? Do they have an open mind? But if not, there's other solutions. It's just being open to those and accepting of those and knowing that they'll survive if they do get a divorce, but it will just be a different kind of hard. Like marriage is really hard, divorce is hard. It's just choosing which one that you want to do. You shouldn't rush into that, but it is important. Like if you are in that space and you've been there for a while, to discuss it as an option and just remove the stigma of it so that you can make the best decision for yourself.
Thank you. Do you have any comments or advice or anything you want to add to people who are struggling in their families right now?
It's valid. It's hard. Relationships are really hard. I would say like it's the number one thing throughout your whole life. You always have relationships that you're balancing, like any aspect at home, at work. And so it's just really difficult. And people are very different from ourselves, where we tend to be like really egocentric and think that people view the world the exact same way as we do, but they just don't. And so just being open to like understanding where somebody's coming from. But if somebody isn't budging on like meeting your needs or being very good with communicating with you, and like they are creating more hurt or harm, then set boundaries. Like it's valid to say like this relationship isn't for me anymore if it's like a family member or really anyone. So being able to set boundaries, because it is valid, like the hurt that people feel. So those are my tips.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think that therapy is super helpful and amazing. I think that it takes like finding the good fit for you. And so sometimes it's really hard to get started, but if people are afraid of getting started, like that's really valid because it's difficult to sift through and find somebody that works for them. But give it a shot, shop around. That's what I always tell my clients. If we meet once and it's not like a good fit right off the bat, then I want them to go try other people. So lots of therapists are also willing to give referrals. So if you do meet with somebody at first and it doesn't really work out, you can ask for referrals as well. And so being able to approach it that way is also really good. But getting started is hard and scary, and it's totally understandable.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
allowing me to interview you and talk about different aspects of being a therapist.
Yeah.
You want to
Thank you.
again how people can find your website and what that website is?
Yeah, it's utah.therapyclinic.com, and my phone number too is 385-484-8654 is our phone number, our Google Voice phone number. So if they want to text or call, they can always reach out through there. Or we are also on Google as well. It's Utah Marriage and Family Therapy Clinic in Orem. And so you can find all my contact through there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.